Welcome to The Inquiry. I'm Gregory Harms. Hello, friends. Welcome to another episode. This one's going to be on Iran. Good one. And then the next one is going to be about art philosophy. So we're going to talk about Duchamp's urinal a lot. Should be fun. But this one, we got a lot to cover today. So we're going to just try to muscle through it, and hopefully it won't be as long as the Karl Marx episode, but hard to say. We're just going to see what happens. Okay. But first things first, a series I've been watching that I really like, which I thought was new, but it's not new. It came out in 2008, so I'm kind of late to the party. Is the #1 ladies detective agency.
I'm going to open a detective agency.
Then the bad men better watch out.
The #1 ladies detective agency.
I'm expecting a young secretary this morning.
Hello, is your husband missing?
It is really fun and quite charming and humane and a list of other adjectives. I highly recommend it. It's starring Jill Scott, who I learned does everything. She writes poetry, she's a singer, she does modeling. She does everything. And she's fantastic in this. And she has a secretary that she works with, that she hires in the series. And okay, can I just say one thing? I've got a little crush on the secretary. Just like a tiny one. Nothing crazy, just like a little tiny schoolboy crush on the secretary. She's kind of weird, and I find her quite adorable and endearing. And yeah, I just thought you should know that. Alright, can we talk about something else? I don't want to talk about this anymore. Let's talk about something else. Let's talk about Iran.
ببیند برود امشب شب مهتاب حبیبم را میخوام حبیبم مگر خواب طبیبم را میخوام.
So Iran, has a very long history. It dates back to antiquity. We could talk about Persia and Iran for, we could have a whole podcast just on Iran. I don't want to just give a lecture on Iranian history and Persian history, but I do want to home in on a few key points about Iranian history, because we're seeing it in the news, you're seeing it in the news a lot, and I want to try to clarify what you're seeing in the news. So that's the purpose of this episode, is not to just drown you in Iranian history and Persian history, but to clarify what you're seeing on the news. So that requires some clarification of some key inflection points in modern Iranian history. So we're going to do that. But still, there's still a lot to cover. We could do an episode on each of these points. But we're going to just kind of crunch it down and make it manageable-ish for you, the viewer. So right off the bat, you got to know something about U.S. foreign policy. Otherwise, none of this makes any sense. So, why do I keep adjusting the camera? Just leave it alone. Okay, I want to make this, again, manageable and make it short and sweet. Because you could do, you could have a whole podcast that's on U.S. foreign policy. There's 3 points you got to remember about U.S. foreign policy to make any sense. Because you can watch CNN and Fox from here to Christmas, and you'll never understand foreign policy at all. Because they don't explain it. Because I don't really know what they do. They sure as hell don't inform their viewers or, want to make you better educated or help you to see the world a little more clearly. They don't seem to be in the business to do that. So 3 points to make U.S. foreign policy a bit clearer. And that is expansionism, access to markets, and suppression of democracy. Now, if you can understand, if you can get a grip on those 3, then that should stand you in good stead for understanding U.S. foreign policy. So, what do I mean by those 3 points? Let's take each in turn. The first one is expansionism. The United States has always been expansionist in its ambitions. In its endeavors. Its approach to statecraft has always been expansionist. It's been expansionist since day one. What was called Manifest Destiny, crossing the continental, what is now the continental 48 states, which involved genocide and wars with neighboring populations. We had to, God gave us this land, and damn it, we're gonna take it. That's the mentality, because these dirty, stupid, lazy natives are in the way of progress. So, our destiny is manifest. We're gonna cross all the way to the west coast and come hell or high water. And then, a little later, in 1823, you get what's called the Monroe Doctrine. And the Monroe Doctrine, issued by the former president, former, really? You gotta say former? President Monroe issued a statement, that's my phone. I think that's funny. Scam likely. I just love that. Scam likely. Sorry about that. So, I'm very popular, even with telemarketers. So 1823, the Monroe Doctrine. Then the president issued this, issued this proclamation, and he basically said that the Western Hemisphere is basically hands off for Europe. Any European intervention in Latin America, any European intervention in anything on this side of the globe will not be tolerated. Okay. So then, that's the Monroe Doctrine. Again, we got our eye on this half of the globe by 1823. And then, I almost said former again, Teddy Roosevelt in 1904 issued the what's called the Roosevelt Corollary. And the Roosevelt Corollary puts the cherry on the sundae of the Monroe Doctrine, and the Roosevelt Corollary says any state, any country on this side of the globe that is found guilty of wrongdoing and impotence, his words, any country or state on this side of the globe found guilty of wrongdoing or impotence will be dealt with. It will not be tolerated. So it just dialed up the Monroe Doctrine a few notches, and it made it very clear to everyone on this side of the globe, on the Western Hemisphere, that you need to watch yourself, because if Uncle Sam doesn't like what you're doing, you will reap the whirlwind. So that's 1904, and this continues. It never stops. And what's called manifest destiny, which if you learn about manifest destiny like in high school history class, they say that manifest destiny basically stopped when the Civil War started. Manifest destiny continues right past World War II. One could say manifest destiny never stopped. Speaking of World War II, okay, let's fast forward to World War II. 1945. Now, the United States is in. We're going to go past an hour. I can tell. I'm only on the first point of the first point. So after World War II, 1945, the United States is the most powerful, richest country on the planet. There is a superpower bipolar contest between Washington and Moscow. But as I've said in a previous episode, Moscow, the Soviet Union was in a distant second place. They were on a defensive footing. They took a pretty bad beating during World War II. The leader of the Soviet Union at the time, Joseph Stalin, was not. He was too busy killing his own people to get into international adventures and spread his tentacles and all this stuff. But it makes for a good cover story, because then the Washington D.C. and the CIA could just go around the world and do whatever they wanted, and they could chalk everything they did up to national security, which was a new concept. I mean, it was as of 1947, basically, it was a new concept. National security. We're gonna, those pesky Soviets, those communists are gonna they're trying to do this X, Y, and Z, and we need to stop them. So we need to invade Korea. We need to invade Vietnam. All these things got chalked up to concern about communist expansion, which was a joke. If we attend to the record, to the historical record and the scholarly record and the declassified record, this stuff is clear. So now, as of 1945, and this really didn't kick in until 1947, now Uncle Sam can really lean on the throttle and look around the world, and all of a sudden, the Roosevelt corollary applies to the whole world, not just the Western Hemisphere. And we found wrongdoing and impotence in a list of states. And they did reap the whirlwind. This is the Roosevelt corollary is probably one of the most important principles of U.S. foreign policy that you need to know. Okay, so that's expansionism. So now the United States can go all over the world. Like I said, Vietnam, Korea. We can go everywhere. Central America, certainly, El Salvador, Nicaragua, and do whatever we wanted to do, and lay waste. Southeast Asia. Laos. They were at the receiving end of this delightful treatment, and everything got chalked up to concern about the Soviet Union, which was a fiction. But it makes for good movies, and it makes for good, makes for a good cover story. but it has nothing to do with reality. So that's expansionism. It never stopped. Manifest destiny. Number 2 is access to markets. Well, that one's easy. China was always the blue ribbon. That was the trophy. If we could access China, and then there's a billion people there that we can sell stuff to, and well, this isn't just it's not exclusive to China. I mean, this applies to Central America and South America as well. We love Uncle Sam always loves to dump exports and develop companies that grow fruit or whatever in Central America, and the locals just need to become amenable to our decision making. And it doesn't matter what the effects are to the economy in wherever in Central America or South America. The knock-on effects are irrelevant. It's what's good for, say, United Fruit, which was a major fruit-producing company that operated in Central America. So access to markets. So anytime America can make a buck and dump exports or access production or develop an industry of some kind in a foreign country, then that's what they're going to do. And if there's any pushback or grumbling on the part of that state or country, well, that's just a violation of the Roosevelt corollary. So that will not be tolerated. That's wrongdoing and impotence, and that will not be tolerated. So that's access to markets. And then 3, suppression of democracy. Now you're told when you turn on CNN or Fox or whatever flavor of crap news you like to watch, that America is out spreading democracy. America does not spread democracy. America prevents democracy. There's a principle in U.S. foreign policy called the domino theory, and there's other metaphors like an onions get used, rotten meat gets used, apples get used. There's a list of metaphors, but the domino is the most common metaphor, and that is simply that if a country that's poor, typically agrarian, wants to develop itself and kind of steer its own path and cut its own path and do its own thing, and do things to benefit the people living in the country, adopt an independent attitude. This is considered wrongdoing and impotence, and it will not be tolerated. And so the fear is, why the domino theory? The fear is that if this tiny country, if this tiny agrarian, poor, weak country steers an independent path and does stuff to benefit the lives of its citizenry, then the next one will do it. Then the next one will do it. Then the next one will do it. And then Uncle Sam loses his grip on the world. So perhaps the most sparkling example of the domino theory in action would be Vietnam. Now you've been told repeatedly that we invaded Vietnam to fight the. We're gonna do an episode on Vietnam. That's for sure. For sure, we're doing an episode on Vietnam. That'd be a really good one. You were told that the United States invaded Vietnam and really leaned on the throttle in 1961 under Kennedy because of fighting communism, and oh no, Ho Chi Minh, Vietnam's going to fall to communism. Who cares? And then it did, which is kind of a sick joke. We invaded Vietnam because Ho Chi Minh, the leader at the time, who was extremely popular, and had no interest in becoming a Soviet satellite or a Soviet puppet. And so the Soviet Union wasn't even interested in Vietnam. We invaded Vietnam because Ho Chi Minh, we didn't like how Ho Chi Minh was, the direction Ho Chi Minh was headed in, adopting an independent attitude and a progressive, dabbling in progressive politics and so on. That's a domino, and that domino was about ready to fall before the Americans took action and invaded. And I'm really glad that Noam Chomsky, I've mentioned Noam Chomsky on the podcast before, Noam Chomsky reminds his listeners, and he gives gave talks all over the world and stuff, reminds people that that the fight in Vietnam was taken to South Vietnam. It wasn't North Vietnam. It wasn't North Vietnam. It was South Vietnam. We tried to ram a system that was agreeable to us into South Vietnam, and the Vietnamese were not having it. And then Uncle Sam just brought the hammer down harder and harder and harder in an attempt to implement a system of governance that was, agreeable to, Washington's idea of what Vietnam should become. That was probably the biggest domino example I can come up with. But there are many others, and so suppression of democracy. You don't spread democracy from 30,000 feet. You don't spread democracy by occupying a country. We invaded, Iraq in 2003. We invaded Afghanistan, I don't know why, in 2001. You don't spread democracy that way. The way you spread democracy is just leave the country alone. Had Afghanistan been left alone, had the Soviets not invaded Afghanistan, had we not spent 20 years in Afghanistan accomplishing nothing, the Soviets accomplished nothing, unless killing innocent people is something, then they did a lot of that, and so did we. But if Afghanistan were just left alone, there were signs of things improving in the 70s, and if Afghanistan had been left alone, I'm not suggesting that it would be Denmark right now, or it would be Sweden, or it would be Germany, but it sure as hell wouldn't be Afghanistan. So that's a good way to let a country develop, is to let the country develop. But you're raining death and destruction from 30,000 feet. That doesn't get you democracy. So the United States does everything in its power to prevent democracy. It's prevented democracy anytime, Central American countries, we'll talk about Nicaragua in a minute, anytime the Central American country got funny ideas about, steering an independent course and so on and so forth, and dabbling in progressive politics, then all of a sudden the death squad show up, and the CIA shows up, and all of a sudden villagers start being murdered, and by the death squads that the CIA has sponsored. This was a pattern in Central America, and the body count is horrifying, and we did this to prevent democracy. So suppression of democracy is a third main principle of U.S. foreign policy. So if you can understand those three, right? Expansionism, access to markets, and suppression of democracy. If you can understand those three things, you can, not that you can understand them, but if you know those three things, then you're well ahead of the game, and you can begin to understand U.S. foreign policy and CNN and Fox will make a little bit more sense when you're watching it. Like, why is the United States involved in this country? Why are we bombing the hell out of this group or this state or this country or whatever? It'll make more sense. Those three are very important. Okay, Orientalism. Now, Orientalism, this is another concept that you need to know if we're going to make any sense of Iran and what's going on in Iran right now and what's been going on in Iran since, the last 75 years, is Orientalism. Now, Orientalism is, I gotta take a sip. This is, I changed my brand breed temporarily. Wait. Waterloo? The name is stupid, but can you see that? This blackberry and lemon's pretty good. Orientalism. You have to understand what's going on in Iran at this time and for the last 75 years. I already said that. What is Orientalism? We'll start there. What is Orientalism? Orientalism was, before Edward Said took hold of the concept, just an academic category. It was it was an area, an academic area, if you will. People engaged in Oriental studies, and they were called Orientalists. And the nature of their work was Oriental or Orientalist in nature. And then in 1978, a Palestinian-American professor from Columbia University by the name of Edward Said wrote a masterpiece called Orientalism. And in that book, Edward Said defines Orientalism, but he kind of redefines Orientalism. He's saying that he says in interviews and stuff that he grew up in the Palestinian Middle East. He grew up in the Arab Middle East. But yet the imagery and the assumptions that he saw and heard throughout his youth puzzled him, because he's like, that's not the Middle East that I know. What I'm seeing in movies and what I'm seeing in print and what I'm seeing in paintings and so on, none of that seems to square with my experience of that part of the world. And so Edward Said began to question this, like, why is that? Why is it so different? Why do I not recognize the Middle East that I hear about? And so Edward Said began to investigate this Orientalist tradition, and he realized that the West has basically defined the Middle East, and by doing so has sort of defined itself along the way, in contrast to the Orient. Now, Americans hear the word Orient and they think of, like, principally China and Japan, but Orient comes from the French word Orient, l'Orient, the East. So it just means East. And the Arab Middle East is part of the Orient. He sees a reduction of that part of the world. And once you read Said's book, I mean, it is scholarly and a little tough to get through, but it's dense. It's not hard to understand. It's just dense, because he did a breathtaking amount of research. and he seems to have read everything in multiple languages. Yeah, it is a text to, it is definitely a text. It's required reading in many departments. If you're doing comparative literature or history or whatever, Orientalism is a required text across, many universities. Said sees in this tradition, and it runs right into the present. I still see it. I see it all the time. I hear it all the time. There's a reduction of what it means to be Arab. Arabs, I have a book. It's a very hefty volume. This guy, I can't think of his name at the moment. Jack Shaheen. Jack Shaheen wrote this book called Real Bad Arabs, Reel. And in it he just catalogs all the times Arabs have been portrayed as bad guys in the movies. And he's very clear about this. He's like, I'm not saying Arabs can't be bad guys in movies. I just find it very suspicious that Arabs in movies are almost always bad guys. We have a very kind of a warped view of that part of the world. In my book, it's not about religion. I talk about Said and Orientalism, and I pay particular attention to a book that Mark Twain wrote called The Innocents Abroad, NTS, Innocents, plural, abroad. And it's a travelogue. And, Mark Twain is traveling all over the world, and he's traveling with a group of people, and I guess they're European and Americans. It's been a while. But it's all over that text. The way he looks at Arabs, the way he looks at the Middle East. You can nod and tip your hat to the ancient Middle East. You can speak with reverence about that, which is typically couched in mythic sort of language and imagery, like flying carpets and magic lanterns and stuff like that, magic lamps. But the modern, like the contemporary Middle East for Mark Twain is who is a great writer and typically progressive in his orientation. He has nothing but contempt for Arab Middle East. You should read the quotes. I pulled a number of quotes in my book. It's not about religion. I pull a number of quotes from Mark Twain, and one that stands out for me is he describes the populations, like the people around town, as swarms of animated rags. I think that really says it all. Swarms of animated rags. They're not even people, right? They're just, these sort of dirty beings that, populate towns in the Middle East and so on and so forth. That is the view. So when we're talking about, say, British and American policy vis-a-vis Iran, we have to keep in mind this Orientalist mindset, because it comes out in the writing. So Edward Said says in his book, the Oriental is irrational, depraved or fallen, childlike, different. Thus the European is rational, virtuous, mature, and normal. And he quotes, he's talking in the book about a document written by a colonial, or it was a speech, rather, a speech given by a colonial officer. And Edward Said distills the speech to the following. England knows Egypt. Egypt is what England knows. England knows that Egypt cannot have self-government, England confirms that by occupying Egypt. For the Egyptians, Egypt is what England has occupied and now governs. Foreign occupation, therefore, becomes the very basis of contemporary Egyptian civilization. So it's this reductive view. Powerful states sought resources and access to markets all over the world, and when you're going to dominate a country, you need to hold the people who live there in contempt, in deeply racist contempt. And so you need to view, Great Britain and later the Americans, found access to, oil reserves all over the Middle East. And, they did a lot of business, if that's the word. Well, sometimes it was business. But the British, had many colonial holdings in the Arab Middle East, and the first order of business is to hold the people who live there in contempt. It's not we're going to get the royal and then hold them in contempt. It's we hold them in contempt already, and then we go get the royal. And it comes out, Edward Said quotes from book after book after book after colonial document after speech. He talks about paintings, he talks about poetry. 80% of the Orientalism book is Edward Said just citing examples. I'd say about 80% of that book is just him backing up what he's saying. Quoting, books in, I can't remember how many languages, and he seems to have read like a library worth of novels, classic novels in English and in French, and I think Italian or Arabic, definitely Arabic. I can't remember if he knew Italian. It's all over the place. And it's not that these novelists or these painters, these artists, or these poets held that part of the world in contempt. It's just operating within an assumption. It's just the assumption. Like, these people are violent. These women are, sultry and, seductive. And so we're going to sexualize the women. The Arab male is violent, irrational. At best, he's irrational. At worst, he's violent, and he's got a knife in his teeth, and he's gonna just cut you up and kill you, and this is the Middle East. I reread Stephen Kinzer's book, and I'll mention this again, All the Shah's Men, An American Coup and the Roots of a Middle East Terror. And I'd like to read a passage from this book, and this really hits the nail on the head, and it gives you a window into how the British saw the Iranians. There was some reports commissioned by the Foreign Office, the Admiralty, the Bank of England, and there were a number of entities involved in these reports. And one British diplomat working on behalf of this commission said the following: an unabashed dishonesty, fatalist outlook, and indifference to suffering. The ordinary Persian is vain, unprincipled, eager to promise what he knows he's incapable or has no intention of performing, wedded to procrastination, lacking in perseverance and energy, but amenable to discipline. Yeah, of course. Above all, he enjoys intrigue and readily turns to prevarication and dishonesty whenever there is a possibility of personal gain. Although an accomplished liar, he does not expect to be believed. They easily acquire a superficial knowledge of technical subjects, deluding themselves into the belief that it is profound. So they're disgusted by these people they're dominating. You know, they're plundering their resources, taking full advantage of every available opportunity to make a dollar, and, you know, like I said, plunder these resources and take advantage of this, that, and the next thing. And they're just disgusted by them. You know, the British developed an oil refinery in Abadan, which is in the southwest corner of Iran. And the Iranians that worked at this refinery in Abadan lived in huts. They lived in squalor. I've seen photos. They just look dirty. I mean, they're so poor, they're dirty. They just, like, that's how they live. And they live in these huts, and they're paid pennies by the British. And the British attitude was, that's their lot in life. That's their lot in life. They're dirty, they're lazy, they're stupid. Just like, you know, the Americans viewed the Native Indians. You know, that's the view of, you know, of the people that Britain was subjugating. You know, they're dirty, they're lazy, they're stupid, they're accomplished liars. You know, there's swarms of animated rags. There's barely a person there. There's barely a human being there. And this is how they're viewed. And when it was suggested that Britain should, you know, pay them more, Sir William Fraser, chairman of the United Kingdom, the oil company in Abadan was called the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, AIOC. And he said, 1 penny more and the company goes broke. Really? Because Iran was the source of vast wealth for the British, and they couldn't pay them 1 penny more, or the company would go broke. That's fascinating. I'll also quote an Israeli working at Abadan, summarizing the British viewpoint. This is an Israeli, and he this is his take on how the British viewed the Iranians working at Abadan. We English have hundreds of years of experience on how to treat the natives. Socialism is all right back home, but out here you have to be the master. Well, that basically tells you everything you need to know. That is what Saeed is talking about in Orientalism. That it's not always hostile like that. It's not always deeply, almost psychotically racist. But there is a view of the Middle East that has trickled down over the ages, across the ages, and affects how we look at the world, how we look at that part of the world. And I hear it in what people say to this day. You know, they see something on CNN, and if you see Arabs, or you see the Arab Middle East on CNN, something's exploding, or they get scary black hoods and carrying Kalashnikov rifles, and it's always bad news. I've been to the Middle East. I've spent time in the Middle East. I saw shocking and horrifying things, like grandmothers sweeping the steps, couples holding hands out for an evening stroll, school kids hitting one another over the head with their book bags, because that doesn't happen in the United States. People buying groceries. That's what I saw. I saw people living their lives and doing absolutely normal things. Yeah, I've spent I've eaten at the tables in the homes of the breathtakingly rich. I have eaten at the tables in the homes of the dirt poor and everybody in between. And the hospitality is always the same. Whether the house I'm in is a palace or whether, the people are penniless, there's a hospitality and there's a pride. And I find Arab culture to be very, very civilized and dignified. And it's a very impressive culture. And we don't see that on CNN or Fox, because CNN and Fox definitely adhere to the if it bleeds, it leads principle. And anything coming out of the Middle East has got to be bad news. It's got to be something exploding. It's got to be violent. It's got to be something like this. It can't be normal people doing normal things. Yeah, it kind of breaks my heart. So when I read Orientalism by Edward Said, I get it. I mean, I really get it. I'm not saying I'm the world's leading expert on Arab culture, but I am familiar with Arab culture, and I've spent time with Arabs, and I've eaten with Arabs, and I've met hundreds of Arabs, and I know that culture pretty well. I'm not, I wouldn't say I'm an expert, but I know that culture pretty well, and I've spent a fair amount of time there, not as much as I'd like, and definitely not as I might be there right now, but my health is stupid. I'd be in the Middle East right now if I could. It's summertime, so as soon as class is over, as soon as the semester's over, I'd be going. I'd be on an airplane. Off I go. But I'm not there now. I'm talking to you. So, yeah, I'm really fond of Arab culture, and the warped view that we have received, and this is self-perpetuating. That's the image we receive, and that's the image we, that's the image we propagate. That's the image we hand on to other people. The Arabs are, unreasonable. The Arabs are violent. The women are, you can sexualize them, of course, but the men, are up to no good one way or the other. So that's Orientalism. So you need to understand that when we start talking about, which we talk about it right quick here, British and American policy in Iran. 1953. All right, now the fat's in the fire. Now it's on. Why is 1953 of importance to, why is it important to Iranian history? And why is it important to our history? Well, as I already mentioned, the British had established an oil refinery in Abadan, and they started the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, the AIOC. So that's what they're doing, and they're producing untold wealth. Iran at the time was the fourth largest oil producer. It was producing upwards of 90% of Europe's oil needs. So you can imagine how well the British did by helping themselves to Iran's oil. So while the British are helping themselves to Iran's oil, a sense of nationalism is increasing across the developed world. People in countries that tend to be weak and poor are getting all the way fed up with British imperialism and French imperialism and so on and so forth. The view of the United States, I hasten to add, was quite positive at this point, because Uncle Sam the people in the Middle East hadn't been helped to the full rich flavor of what it meant to be at the receiving end of Uncle Sam's policies and priorities. But at this time, the Arab view of the United States was quite positive. So this nationalism is, people are starting to push back, and then the Iranians get the funny idea that Iranian oil, wait for it, belongs to Iran. Oh, well, we can't have that. You know, the British were apoplectic, and they were incensed. They couldn't see straight. How dare these swarms of animated rags suggest that we don't belong there, and that this oil's not ours. We stole it fair and square. So the UK is outraged. People in London, heads of state, policy planners, architects, diplomats are just outraged at this lack of gratitude. So the British want to do something about this. They're like, this is ridiculous. And so the Great Britain goes crying to Washington, D.C. The bottom lip quivering and the whole thing. It's kind of pathetic. But they went to the Truman administration, and they complained, and they went to the World Court. They tried everything. They had no luck. So the Truman administration was hesitant. They didn't. The British were talking about. We need to get rid of. We need to conduct regime change. They didn't call it regime change at that time, but conduct regime change, and we need to intervene in Iranian politics in a direct and decisive way. The Truman White House was not on board with this. The Truman White House feared if the British did that, it would create regional instability on a level that they couldn't handle. They could get out of their control. So you don't want to do that. The Truman White House didn't want to do that. Also, Truman felt that if the British intervened in Iran, that it would push the Iranians toward the Soviet Union. And the Iranians were never interested in the Soviet Union, and likewise, the Soviet Union was never really interested in Iran. So but everything, of course, has to pass through the Cold War filter. That was the thinking of the Truman White House. So the British, so then Iran nationalizes their oil supply, and they basically announce the termination of the AIOC, the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, and it's replaced with an Iranian company. And so the British can't even see straight. They're so angry, and they impose an embargo on the oil supply, and they start like the Rosemary oil tanker from Italy. They descended on the Rosemary oil tanker. They descended on it with warships, and so this kind of sent a signal to other countries that might want to do business in Iran and buy Iranian oil. The British maintained that the Rosemary was loaded with stolen property, that they stole this oil, and that this wouldn't be tolerated. Any foreign business in Iran buying Iranian oil would not be tolerated. So then, So this sent a message, and it crippled the. I guess I'm not supposed to use that word, but I am a cripple, so I guess I can use it. This brought, practically brought Iranian petroleum sales to a halt, which was a major part of their income, national income. And then the United Kingdom started to meddle in Iranian elections. Started to attempt to sponsor politicians and members of their parliament that they thought were, pliable and, would be obedient to British expectations. And they started meddling in Iranian elections. And at this time, there was the emergence of a guy by the name of Mohammad Mossadegh. And Mossadegh was a member of the Iranian parliament called the Majlis. And the Majlis was, had increasing power in Iranian politics. Iran, up to that point, had been basically under the control of what's called the Shah. And the Shah had basically supreme power. But the Majlis, the Iranian parliament, had increasing amounts of power at this time. And then with the emergence of Mohammad Mossadegh, he was adored from one end of Iran to the other. He had one British diplomat estimated that he had 95 to 98% approval rating. I mean, he was adored for a number of reasons. The British described him as a fanatic and a lunatic and a communist, and they had a list of negative adjectives. An American diplomat operating in Iran had a different take and described Mossadegh as friendly and smart, and he had a list of positive adjectives. It's kind of like Ho Chi Minh, the same thing with Ho Chi Minh. The colonial powers that lorded over Vietnam described Ho Chi Minh in these terrible terms, and the Americans, before the Americans got involved in Vietnam, described Ho Chi Minh as he's a pretty reasonable guy. So same thing here, same thing. The beat goes on, same thing. Mossadegh is described as pretty, even-keeled, rational guy, pretty likable. That's not how the British saw him, for sure. And so his popularity, and he played a role definitely in the nationalization of Iran's oil supply. So at this time, the prime minister, the newly elected prime minister, was Winston Churchill again, and his foreign secretary was Anthony Eden. And Churchill and Eden wanted him to go. He's too popular. He's got funny, again, this is, the British version of the Roosevelt corollary. He's got to go. He's got funny ideas. He's beloved by his people. He's got this crazy idea that the oil under Iran belongs to Iran. So again, the British go to Truman. Truman's not having it. I don't think, it's not because Truman was a virtuous and wonderful person. I just think that Truman was performing slightly different calculations and drawing different conclusions on the British. Churchill and Eden's prayers are answered. Eisenhower gets elected president. And then Churchill and Eden run this plan by Eisenhower, and they got the green light. And then the CIA and MI6, which is British foreign intelligence, like the CIA. The British were involved in this coup, but it was basically an American coup. The Americans ran the show. The Americans called the shots. The British were just there as adjuncts. And, the They overthrew. They took over the newspapers. They hired and created mobs that were anti-Mossadegh. Mossadegh was arrested. Mossadegh was sentenced to house arrest, and he was replaced. The leadership in Iran was replaced by the Shah. The Shah that had been excused. He got back. Shah's brought back to Iran and installed, and he was, kind of a, kind of a spineless person, and easy to manipulate and easy to push around. And the British were delighted. He met all the criteria for a dutiful client, and they flooded Iran with weaponry. The Americans flooded Iran with weaponry, and the CIA helped the Shah develop the feared and tyrannical Savak, S-A-V-A-K, Savak, which was the Shah's private, sort of secret police, his Praetorian Guard. And the Savak was feared across the country. So, this really badly affected the trajectory of Iran's history. This did unspeakable damage to that country and to the people living in that country. And it set that country on a path that continues to this very day. The people who are in charge of Iran now are in charge because of the revolution that took place in 1979. And here we go. 1979. The coup in 53 brought the Shah back to power, and through his techniques of secret police and unbelievable weapons acquisition and jailing and torturing his opponents, and he just created a culture of fear in that country. And the people of Iran were really good and sick of that guy, and viewed him as basically nothing but which is what he was. They viewed him correctly as a British sock puppet. That's all he was. So the Iranian people were disgusted. There's one thing I want to add, because it will make the revolution in '79 make a lot more sense. And I don't want to go real long on this, though I think this episode's going to be long anyway. The phenomenon of Islamism. The Middle East, right around this time, the Middle East was undergoing a bit of a shift. Not broadly, not at the popular level so much, but there were groups of intellectuals that were dabbling in what became labeled Islamism. There were a number of intellectuals in the Middle East that thought that a return to wasn't looking to borrow from the past, or it wasn't looking to go back to the past. It was looking to borrow from the past and bring that into the future. Return to Islamic principles that they felt that the Middle East had sort of had become weak and had failed, and now they're dominated by the French and the British and eventually the Americans. They thought the answer lay in Islamic principles. And this didn't have broad popular appeal, but at first, but that was sort of the thinking. One of the first and principal thinkers when it comes to Islamism is Sayyid Qutb, and he wrote a very short book called Milestones in 1965, and in it he lays out this sort of idea. And there were a number of other thinkers, and among those thinkers was Ruhollah Khomeini, who was Iranian. Would later become, we'll get to that. I don't want to get ahead of myself. Just remember the name Ruhollah Khomeini. So this idea does eventually trickle down to the popular level. And people across the Middle East felt like, yeah, we could do that. That's something, we could put on more traditional dress and, assert our identity as Muslims, and this will help. Every little bit helps, I guess. And that might do it. So you started to see this in the mid 20th century and into the 60s, and then it runs into the present. I mean, I've had people point out to me, walking around Gaza, walking around the Palestinian West Bank. I'm with an Arab guy, and he points to a woman wearing the all-black chador, with her face covered, maybe the khimar or whatever. I'm not saying khimar with the kh, with the glottal, to be, exotic or something. It's just that it's funny. If you say it's a khimar, that is the thing that goes across the woman's face. A himar with the soft H means a donkey, so you don't want to make that mistake. So that's why I say khimar, because it makes it clear that you're not talking about a donkey. I'm just, I'm alert to that stuff, to the details of Arabic. So sometimes, because my Arabic is kind of rubbish. but I know that. I know Himar. So they felt that these Islamist theorists felt that the Middle East was wallowing in a darkness that was similar to the darkness that existed or prevailed before the arrival of the Prophet Muhammad. This darkness is called Jahiliyyah, and there's the Arabic. Jahiliyyah. This Jahiliyyah is the pre-Islamic, sort of darkness or ignorance that prevailed before the arrival of the Prophet Muhammad and the revelations, bestowed upon him by the Archangel Gabriel, which became known as the Quran. That's what's in the Quran, is what was revealed to the Prophet Muhammad by the Archangel Gabriel. We're going to do a podcast. We're going to do an episode on Islam. That's going to be a good one. So we'll get Vietnam and Islam. Yeah. Anyhow, this is going to be a long one. It's going to be a long one? I feel like I've been talking for a while. So we got more to go. I'll try to... No, it won't take forever. So the Islamist theorists wanted to return to the glory that was, the pinnacle or the zenith of Islamic enlightenment. And they wanted to borrow from that, like I said. They didn't want to go back to it. They just wanted to borrow from it and bring it into the present, bring it into the future. And that was to escape this Jahiliyyah. So that was what was going on in the Middle East at the time. Is this thing? Oh yeah, I think I forgot to mention. Walking around the Palestinian West Bank and the Gaza Strip, I had Arab men point out the Himar. Yeah, I got tangled in my own netting there. So the reason I brought that up is because the guy I was with, I think we were in the Gaza Strip, and he pointed to a woman who was wearing all black, just like a little slit for the eyes. All black, gloves, the whole bit, head to toe. And he pointed to her, she was like across the street or something. And he's like, you didn't see that. It's a handful of years ago. That's new. And I thought to myself, that's interesting. That's interesting. That's not in the Quran, that women have to be covered black head to toe. It's not in the Quran. It's not even in the Hadith. Women should just dress conservatively, but this all black, chador is not in the Hadith or the Quran. The Hadith is the collected sayings, the collected wisdom of the Prophet Muhammad. It's not in there. Women should dress conservatively. That's all it said. So a lot of this is cultural, and a lot of this is family to family. And this changed when this Islamism began to trickle down. Okay, now we go back to 1979. So, the revolution in 1979. The Iranian people are fed up. They're fed up with the Shah. They're fed up with the British. They're fed up with imperialism. They're fed up with being under the boot of some other country. And so Raule Khomeini becomes the Ayatollah. He rises to power in Iran. And he rises to power on a wave of serious anti-Western sentiment. And his speeches are aflame with anti-Western rhetoric. He was not about to kowtow to Britain. He was not about to kowtow to Washington, D.C. That was not going to happen. So, as of this time, in 1979, which is interesting because I was alive at this time. I'm 53 years old, so I was born in 1972. Here's a picture of me in 1979. I look kind of medicated in that picture. I guess I'm really focused on what's on the television. That's my brother next to me, Jason. The guy with the red hair. He looks a little more alert. I think he was a little more alert than me. So I think that picture is quite appropriate. Sadly, we lost Jason in 1995 due to a car accident. So he's no longer with us, which is quite sad. But that was me in 1979, maybe during the Iranian Revolution. Little did I know. So Iran would never be the same, and Iran is still under the control of a supreme leader and the clerics, and it's still a theocracy. Theocracy means the combination of theology or theocratic, and it's a theocratic system of governance, right? Theocracy. Iran is still under the same theocracy that it was under in 1979. The supreme leader right now is Ali Khamenei. It's similar last name, Khamenei. Ali Khamenei. He's the supreme leader now. But Ruhollah Khomeini was the supreme leader after the revolution of '79, and they would not be. They were not gonna be subjugated by the British or anybody else for that matter. It's not to say there weren't points of contact between Khomeini's Iran and Israel and the United States, because there were. During the revolution, 52, well, more than 52, but it ended up being 52, Americans were taken hostage and kept for 444 days. Now, they were kept for 444 days. And the Carter administration was trying desperately to get them back. There were a couple of failed military attempts to go in and extract them. This failed miserably. So the elections are approaching in November. Yeah? In 1980, the elections are approaching. And the Reaganites are afraid that there's going to be what's called an October surprise. And they're afraid that Carter is going to bring home the hostages. This was a major news issue in the United States. The hostages, this took over American news coverage. Every American was talking about it. This was the thing you discussed at the water cooler. So the Reaganites, the Reagan campaign, were afraid that Carter was going to pull an October surprise and bring the hostages home and maybe win the election. Can't have that. So the Reaganites, the Reagan campaign, I guess the Reaganites, I mean, that's more refers to when they were in the White House. But the people around Reagan, the Reagan campaign, made contact with Ayatollah Khomeini's Iran and cut a deal. We're going to send you arms, which we know you want. You just hang on to the hostages for 76 more days. You keep the hostages for 76 more days, and then you release them. And the Ayatollah released the hostages minutes after Ronald Reagan was inaugurated as president of the United States. like 5 or 6 minutes after. Right after, hand on the Bible, the whole thing. And then the hostages were released because the Reaganites cut a deal. Now, there is no hard evidence of this, but there is a mountain of indirect evidence supporting this thesis. I would steer you toward Gary Sick. Gary Sick was on Carter's National Security Council. He was in charge of the Iran desk, basically. Not basically. He was in charge of the Iran desk on the National Security Council for Carter. And he wrote a book called October Surprise. And maybe you should take a sip. And in it, he makes his case for the Reaganites. I keep saying Reaganites. Doesn't matter. Cutting a deal with Ayatollah Khomeini's Iran. Here's some nukes. Let the hostages go. And then we see it again with the Contras. More arms. Hostages get released. Some of them. Yeah. And it's funny, Israel's always there. Israel's always there to, facilitate these things, and some of the arms get run through Israel, and yeah, it's a weird, cozy relationship between that early, Khomeini, Iran, and the United States and Israel. Okay, last stop, this nuclear business. We're seeing a lot of that in the news. Israel's bombing Iran. Iran's bombing Israel. Talk of Iran's nuclear program. Blah, 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 blah. What does all that mean? Things were cozy early on. Things soured later between, especially, Israel and Iran. Now, it's important to keep in mind, just to kind of frame this. Israel is basically, we're going to do a whole episode on Iran, or on Israel too. Yeah, we should do that because that's important. Just suffice it to say, Israel is basically a means of projecting American power into the region. The best way I've heard Israel described is a dry-docked American aircraft carrier. You got Israeli pilots flying American planes. That's what they do. Israel's kind of a regional junkyard dog. The Americans never engaged in direct, boots-on-the-ground colonialism. That was Britain. That was France. That wasn't... The Americans always decided, they decided early on that they weren't going to engage in that kind of imperialism. They liked things remote control. They'd rather do it from a desk in Washington, D.C. They're not going to, putting hundreds of thousands of soldiers on the ground and physically taking over a country. The Americans have occupied countries before. I'm sorry, that's creaky. I gotta tighten up the bolts. Well, I'm not gonna do it, but somebody's got to tighten the bolts. Somebody's got to tighten those bolts. Israel is an adjunct to U.S. military power, to U.S. hard power, and that is the role they play. That's what's expected of them, and that's the service they provide. It's not good for Israel. It's not good for the Israeli people, but it suits Uncle Sam just fine. All right, the Iran-Contra affair. I guess you call it an affair. I don't know what to call it. Affair. It gets called an affair. Iran-Contra affair. What? Now, many Americans have heard of the Iran-Contra, and many Americans are old enough to remember seeing this BS on television, like Oliver North and all that nonsense, in these congressional hearings that took place. Many Americans can remember that, but I don't know many people who could explain the Iran-Contra affair. They just remember seeing Oliver North. That's it. With his military haircut and his side part and his sad eyes and his golly gee tone of voice. Don't get me started on Oliver North. Who went on to become president of the NRA. Wow. Here's the Iran-Contra affair. Iran sponsored proxies throughout the Middle East. For example, Hezbollah, which was a resistance guerrilla organization in Lebanon. They started because of Israeli occupation and Israeli behavior conduct in Lebanon. So then you get Hezbollah. Hezbollah is a very seriously well-armed, well-trained, disciplined fighting force, guerrilla outfit. Probably the most elite paramilitary fighting force in the world. They got lots of missiles and arms, and they're renowned for their discipline and their training and their organization. So Khomeini's Iran sponsored, and Iran still sponsors Hezbollah in in Lebanon. Because of Israeli and American meddling in Lebanon at the time, and I won't go into that, otherwise this episode's going to take 6 hours. Hezbollah started taking hostages. So the Americans decide, we're going to offer the Iranians arms, which the Iranians definitely wanted. The idea was, we're going to offer them, this is under Ronald Reagan, we're going to offer the Iranians arms. But with the intent of the Iranians putting pressure on Hezbollah to release hostages. This never went smoothly. Some were released, some more were taken, and then Iran got their arms. This is after Ronald Reagan repeatedly went on television and told the American people, we don't negotiate with terrorists. We don't, we won't have anything to do with them. We're not gonna, pay. There's rumors that we're paying the Iranians with arms to get the hostages back. He lied through his teeth to the American people, and not once. So this is going on. Running arms to Iran in the hopes of getting the hostages freed. So the CIA decides they're going to take profits. They're going to take some of the profits from the arms sales. Some were run through Israel, some were run through the United States, but there's a lot of money to be made there, and the CIA brought that money to Nicaragua. Now Nicaragua was undergoing its own revolution, and the Sandinistas had overthrown the Somoza regime, and so the CIA created what are called the Contras. They were the counter-revolutionary fighting force, called the Contras. The CIA created the Contras because the CIA didn't want, again, this is a violation of the Roosevelt corollary. The CIA didn't want Nicaragua to steer an independent path, steer an independent course. So we're gonna try to squash what the Sandinistas, who just overthrew the Somoza regime, and we're gonna a lot of these fighters that were loyal to Somoza went into Honduras, and so the CIA developed the Contras, and then we're funding the Contras with the proceeds from the arms sales through Israel, through the United States, and brought them to Nicaragua. Now, this was all done beyond anything that was deemed acceptable by the U.S. Congress. Congress was not in support of this. The American people were not in support of this. Both entities felt that we should not be conducting these sorts of affairs in the Central America. Oliver North said, F the Congress. But what's interesting about Oliver North's comment is that it wasn't insulting to Congress. I mean, kind of was, I guess. But his comment is subsumed by the population. Because the population's views were in sync with the Congress's. So when Oliver North said F the Congress, he's really saying F the American people. Neat, huh? So, this is going on under the noses of the Reagan administration. I don't know how Reagan, well, that's not a surprise that Reagan didn't understand or didn't know what was going on with his own administration, because there are people around the president. This wasn't just the CIA. There were people around the president, 2 consecutive national security advisors, Robert McFarlane and John Poindexter. There's a list of others. William Casey, who was director of Central Intelligence, Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North, a retired Air Force officer by the name of Secord. There was a list of other people. They all should have gone to prison. They did not. This was going on beyond the government. They kind of became a shadow government and conducting these affairs. And the Contras were, murdering villagers and shooting children, and it was a horrifying affair. And Oliver North is in front of testifying in front of Congress and talking about how wonderful, and these are freedom fighters, and these are great people. They were not great people. They were terrorists being funded with American money beyond American approval, beyond government or congressional oversight. They were just doing their own thing. And that's the Contra affair, the Iran-Contra affair. Yeah, it's funny when these things happen. Nobody goes to prison. It's like when the economy tanked in 2008. How many Wall Street executives went to prison? The same number that went to prison during the Iran-Contra. All the names I just mentioned. Every one of them should have gone to prison. And not because they were operating outside the government, or that's not the part that bothers me. The part that bothers me is that what their people were doing to the Nicaraguan people. That's why they should have gone to prison. They shouldn't have gone. Fine. I mean, it's not great. It's illegal under American law that they conducted these operations, conducted this covert program outside of the government's oversight, outside of congressional oversight. Yeah. They were funding people who were murdering villagers in Nicaragua. It's unspeakable. So that's the Iran-Contra. So this isn't the first time that the Americans or the Israelis had a cozy, albeit weird, relationship with Ayatollah Khomeini's Iran. But things have soured between Israel and Iran. And now things have gotten violent, and Israel bombs Iran, and Iran bombs Israel, and a lot of these bombing campaigns are theatrical in nature. They're not trying to take a pound of flesh. They are making a show. Like, we're doing something. So a lot of it's theater, and it should be viewed as theater. The Israelis won't shut up about about Iran's nuclear program. What's up with Iran's nuclear program? I keep saying Israel. Iran does not have nuclear weapons. They just don't. They are enriching uranium at very high levels. Yes. They are enriching uranium at around 60%. That's high. For domestic purposes, you only need enrich for energy and medical applications and industrial applications. You only need enrichment 3 to 5%. But so 60 is very, very high. Is it weapons grade? It is not. Weapons grade uranium is around 90%. And that takes some doing to get from 60 to 90. That takes some doing. And even when you arrive at 90%, it's not like ta-da, and then you just put it in a warhead and off you go. It's not how that works. This takes a while. It takes some doing. No one in the CIA, no one in Mossad, which is Israel's foreign intelligence service, no one in CIA or Mossad are saying anything about Iran having nukes. I read the journal called Foreign Affairs. It is published by the Council on Foreign Relations. It is the elite journal on U.S. foreign policy. That's it. That's the tippy top. That is the elite journal. I read it obsessively. And they do have articles on Iran. There are articles on Iran in just about every issue. But I haven't seen a single sentence about Iran having a nuclear weapon. And if Iran had a nuclear weapon, and if that's what Central Intelligence was saying, and if that's what Mossad was saying, it sure as hell would be in the pages of Foreign Affairs. It has not been. The New York Times recently just said no. They're not seeing that. They're not hearing that from Langley. They're not hearing it from Tel Aviv. It's not happening. There's no evidence. There's no one saying that, and no intelligence gathering is indicating that the Iranians have a nuclear weapon. They are enriching at very high levels. That much is true, 60%. But that's a hop, skip, and a jump. I mean, it's more than a hop, skip, and a jump. It takes a bit to get from 60 to 90, and then when you get to 90, you're not done. So the Iranians have a way to go if they want to develop a nuclear weapon. So they've been at this for 20 years. The New York Times is quick to point out, 20 years. It does not take 20 years to develop a nuclear weapon. The Israelis did it in about 7 or 8 years. 7 or 8 years. Pakistan took a little longer. I don't know how long India took. I know Pakistan's nuclear program took a little longer, but it takes about Israel did it in a real concerted way, and about 7 years. They were able to their nuclear reactor at Dimona went critical in about 7 years, and they were off to the races. So 20 years. The Iranians have been developing a nuclear weapon for 20 years? What the hell have they been doing? Now, and I'm not the first person to say this, but if I am not the first person to say this, but if the Iranians are not developing a nuclear weapon, which I don't think they are, because there's just no evidence to suggest that they are, they're nuts. If I were in charge of Iran, I would want a nuclear weapon. Not because I'm pro-nuclear weapons. I don't want to see Iran get a nuclear weapon. I don't want to see any state get a nuclear weapon. And I think the countries that do have nuclear weapons should get rid of them. Nevertheless, if the world can live with Pakistan having a nuclear weapon, the world can live with Iran having a nuclear weapon. Pakistan makes me a lot more nervous than the Iranians. The Iranians, according to, Central Intelligence and according to, Israeli intelligence, these are rational actors. We're told that they're lunatics, and we're back to the Orientalism bit. We're told that they're lunatics and they're irrational, and they're just gonna develop a nuclear bomb and then lob it into Tel Aviv. Probably not. Probably not. Yeah, they're rational actors. Pakistan makes me a lot more nervous having a nuclear weapon than the Iranians. And the Iranians don't seem to be developing a nuclear weapon, despite the fact that the Americans have made it abundantly clear that if you want Uncle Sam to leave you alone, develop a nuclear weapon. Join the club. It's called the Nuclear Club. And join the club, and then Uncle Sam will leave you alone. But, the Americans, the Donald Trump, the American president, he just, they just punched holes in, the side of a mountain. Again, I think most of it was theater. They didn't really accomplish much. The main nuclear sites in Iran are Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan. Those are your three major nuclear sites in Iran, and they have not been demolished. There's been some damage, but they have not been demolished, and they'll be back online in short order. I think Trump's bombing of Iran was more theater. And according to the Chatham House, which is a think tank in London, he telegraphed his intentions. You don't tell your enemies you're coming. You don't give them heads up. And it looks like he gave them heads up. And so he can, he can look tough, and, he drops the bombs on Iran, and then he can turn around and maybe conduct some diplomacy, and he can return to the joint agreement that was in place, but Trump withdrew from. There was an agreement. The permanent seats on the UN Security Council all signed it, and everything was going well, and Iran was complying with the agreement, and everything was fine. Everybody was on board. The entire Security Council, well, the permanent seats on the Security Council, signed the agreement. Iran was complying. Everything was fine, and then Trump withdrew from it. Well, probably because it had, Obama's signature on it. Because can't have Obama's signature on anything. So that's got to go. So he withdrew, and then he's going to bomb, punch some holes in a mountain, and then he can conduct diplomacy, and then maybe return to something akin to the JCPOA, the joint agreement between the world powers on the Security Council and Iran. We'll see. I feel this has probably been a long one. Did I cover everything? I think I covered everything. Whew. Okay. Next episode, art philosophy. Talking about a urinal. That's going to be a good time. All right. Thank you for joining us on this episode of The Inquiry.